All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Kabbalah Coffee. It's great to see you all. So it's great to have you all here. The topic that I wrote in the of all destruction, hopefully, is for the sake of construction. In other words, we're going to talk about what tears things down in order to understand how to build things back up. That's the goal of today's session. So once again, just a few quick points. I've now muted everybody just so that things are nice and quiet and everyone can hear the class. If at any point you want to ask a question, you want to interject with something, you want to share something, please unmute yourself and jump right in. This is meant to be a discussion, a dialogue, so please do so. So that's that point. The other point is that I'm going to be sharing my screen at various times throughout today's session in order to be able to study some text together. In fact, we're going to be starting by studying a few Talmudic texts. So I want to take you back in time. I wrote in the email 2,500 years ago, but in truth, it's longer than 2,500 years. It's closer to 3,000 years. 2,900 years plus. So what happened then? What happened was King Solomon built the first holy temple in Jerusalem. Now, there had been a sanctuary, a Mishkan, a tabernacle built by Moses hundreds of years prior, at God's behest, upon around 1 year after the Exodus from Egypt. The Jewish people built the Mishkan, built the tabernacle. That lasted for a few hundred years. Ultimately, that was destroyed, and eventually the Jews built a Beis HaMikdash, a holy temple in Jerusalem. The first temple was designed by David, built by Solomon, and it stood for 410 years. The second temple was built 70 years later, after the destruction of the first temple, built by the Jews that had returned from the exile, from the first temple's exile, and that temple stood for 420 years. It was destroyed by the Romans, and that's where we are today. So it's interesting. David L. is showing us some temple action in his background, if you could see that. Okay, so it's interesting because the Talmud in a few places talks about what was the cause of the temple's destruction. Now, I need to clarify something that is really, really important. And this is a huge caveat. Oftentimes, you'll hear people that will say, oh, you know why this happened or that disaster? Because, look, those people are not doing what they need to be doing. Because, you ever hear people say that? Yes? Like this tsunami, that earthquake, that hurricane, that coronavirus is happening because, right? Because people aren't doing, those people aren't doing what they should be doing. It happens. People say that. And I get asked very, very often, so what's the Jewish take on that? Or what does Kabbalah say about that? Or what do you say about that? And I say, if you're trying to play God, try again. Sorry, don't try again. Because who are you to play God? Who are you to say why something happened? How do you know? What are you basing it off of? A guess? Okay, it's a guess. I don't know what makes it valid just because you guessed it. Unless somebody says that God spoke to them and told them, that's something else. But I will say this. The Talmud discusses rationales for tragedy. The Talmud says that the Mishkan, the tabernacle, was destroyed because of one thing. The first temple was destroyed for another thing. The second temple was destroyed for another thing. So it seems like the Talmud does play, I don't know if it plays God or does attribute rationales for destruction, for negative events. So maybe there is a basis in Torah scholarship to give rationales. But what's interesting is that when the Talmud talks about these causes, it doesn't talk about it as someone else's problem. It talks about it as our problem. In other words, it's not saying, oh, y'all sinned and that's why this is happening to you. That's not kosher. That's cruel. To say that I feel like I need to step up in a certain area and that could fix a problem, that's constructive. That's owning it and improving from it. Do you see the difference? Yes? One is attributing blame and justification. It was blaming the victim and justifying the justifying the tsaris, justifying the tribulations, and the other is being introspective and saying, what can I do to change, what can I do, or what can we do to change ourselves to ensure that this doesn't happen again? And the Talmud is taking the latter approach. In fact, in our prayers on the holidays, we just came from the holiday of Passover a little over a week ago, and in the prayers for the holidays, we have a refrain. There's a certain phrase there, "Umipnei chatoenu galinu me'artzenu," which translates to, because of our sins, umipnei chatoenu, because of our chatoim, because of our sins, galinu, we were exiled, me'artzenu, from our land. Notice the ownership of the language. Not because of their sins they were exiled from the land, but because of our sins we were exiled from the land. In other words, it's on us. It's on all of us. We're all part of the problem. We can all be part of the solution. The Talmud famously says that that no matter who it is, if the temple is not rebuilt in your lifetime, or in our lifetime, it's like the temple is destroyed in our lifetime. I'll say that again. It says whoever lives and the temple is not built in their lifetime, it's like the temple was destroyed in their lifetime, which means that it's a personal loss. And when it comes to a personal loss, a person can absolutely be introspective. Again, when it comes to blaming someone else for their tragedy, for their loss, that's cruel. But when it comes to being introspective about our own loss, that's something that is constructive, and that's something that to an extent we all naturally do, and we all ought to do. As Maimonides says, following any loss, the one who's reeling from the loss should take it to heart and should think about what lessons they can learn from that loss. The living shall take to their hearts. Okay, so with that in mind, I want to jump into a piece of Talmud that explores what happened with the Mishkan, with the tabernacle with the tabernacle that was destroyed, what happened with the first temple, and what happened with the second temple. Okay, so this is Tractate Yoma, which is a tractate that deals with primarily deals with the laws of Yom Kippur. But of course, as it is the Talmud, there's a lot of things that are discussed that are related loosely and maybe not so loosely. Okay, so take a look. I'm going to share my screen. Let's do this one. Okay. Okay, tell me when you guys can see that. Give me a thumbs up, please. You got it? All right, fantastic. I'm going to see if I can make the screen a little bit bigger. Looks like I can. Okay. Here we go. The Talmud here is talking about the temple, which makes sense. Tractate Yoma again is talking about the laws of Yom Kippur, and of course the laws of Yom Kippur back in the day, a lot of it had to do around the temple. There was a lot of services in the temple. So take a look at this interesting Talmudic piece. We're not going to read through the whole section. I'm going to skip around a little bit, but you'll get a kind of a basic understanding of what's going on. The Talmud begins with a quote. But the years of the wicked, 120 years, in which over 300 high priests served. This is absolutely related to the laws of Yom Kippur, because in Yom Kippur, the high priest went into the Holy of Holies, and if the high priest was not worthy of going into the Holy of Holies, the high priest would not make it out alive. In fact, it says that they used to tie a rope around the high priest, and at some point after he went into the Holy of Holies, they would tug on it, and if there was no pull back, they would yank out his body. Because going into that space in the Holy of Holies, when somebody is not worthy of it, would be cause for loss of life, as the Torah tells us regarding the sons of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu. So again, the Talmud is quoting a verse that says, but the years of the wicked will be shortened. And it says this is a reference to the second temple, which stood for 420 years. And in that span, over 300 high priests served. Now, let's continue in the Talmud. In calculating the tenures of the high priests, deduct from the figure of 420 years, 40 years that Shimon HaTzadik, Shimon the righteous, served, and 80 years that Yochanan, the high priest, served, 10 years that Yishmael ben Pavi served, and some say 11 years that Rabbi Elazar ben Charsam served. So if you take all of those high priests that served for longer durations, and you add them all together, and then you subtract that, you take that away from the 430 years, you'll see that we're not left with that many years. These men were all righteous and were privileged to serve extended terms. After deducting those 130 or 141 years, go out and calculate from this point forward to conclude each and every one of the remaining high priests did not complete his year in office, as the number of remaining high priests is greater than the number of years remaining. Right? So it's simple math. You start off with 430 years, and you subtract 130. So 130 minus 430 is 300. And you had 300 high priests serving in those 300 years, which means that they made it basically a year. And if you say the 11 years that Rabbi Elazar ben Charsam served, which makes it 141 years minus 430, that means you only have 289 years in which 300 high priests served, which means that some didn't even make it a year. So what the Talmud is bringing out is a very simple idea, and that is, in the times of the Second Temple, there was corruption in the office of high priest, of the high priest. And what was the nature of the corruption? You did have righteous individuals who served. You had Shimon HaTzadik served for 40 years. Yochanan, the high priest, served for 80 years. Yishmael ben Pavi, Rabbi Elazar ben Charsam. You had some that were deserving of the title of high priest, but then you had others that only became the high priest because they paid for the office, the position. They paid for it. And they paid for it, and they got it, but they didn't make it. What's amazing is that according to the Talmud and according to the commentaries, you had people lining up to pay for the position of high priesthood that knew they weren't worthy, knew they wouldn't survive, did it anyway because of the holiness that was involved. They would pay any price to go into the Holy of Holies and to have that experience of seeing the ark and the keruvim, the cherubs, and the divine presence there, even though they knew they wouldn't make it out alive. So on one level, it represents a spiritual desire to be close at all costs. On the other hand, it was corruption and bribery and whatever. So it wasn't so kosher. But that's what it was. That's what was going on in the Second Temple era. Things weren't always so hunky-dory. Now, the Talmud continues to talk about what was the cause of the destruction of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, the first temple, and the second temple. So here we go. Apropos the sins of the high priests in the second temple, the Gemara, the Talmud cites that Rabbi Yochanan ben Torta said the following. Here we go. Due to what reason was the tabernacle, the Mishkan, in Shiloh destroyed? Shiloh destroyed in the time of the prophet Samuel. And the Talmud answers, it was destroyed due to the fact that there were two matters that existed in the tabernacle. Number one, forbidden sexual relations, and number two, degradation of consecrated items. There were forbidden sexual relations as it is written in the book of Samuel. Now, Eli, the high priest, Eli was very old, and he heard what his sons were doing to all of Israel, how they lay with the women who did service at the opening of the tent of meeting. Okay, so that's one verse. And by the way, the Talmud continues. And although Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani said, that Rabbi Yochanan said, anyone who says that the sons of Eli sin by engaging in forbidden sexual relations is nothing other than mistaken, even according to the alternative interpretation of the verse, that it was due to the fact that they deferred the sacrifice of their bird offerings by women after childbirth, nevertheless, the verse ascribes to them as if they lay with them. Whatever, basically the Talmud continues to explain that they didn't actually commit adultery at the foot of the temple. What they did was they were delaying offerings from women who were bringing it after childbirth, and that was a necessary piece in order for them to resume intimacy with their husbands. And because they were lax, because they were slow in bringing the offerings of these women and delaying their resumption of intimacy with their husbands, so it's considered as if they interfered with the intimacy of these women. And it says in the verse that they lay with them, but it doesn't mean literally. It means that they somehow interfered with the intimacy of those marriages, and that was considered to be a very strong grievance. So it was a delay in offering the sacrifices, and there was, again, what was the other thing that was mentioned? It was also degradation of consecrated items. So those were the two reasons, two rationales cited by the Talmud as to why the Mishkan, the first tabernacle, was destroyed. Okay, the Talmud explains what the degradation of consecrated items was. Okay, but let's continue. All right, let's get to the first temple. So that was the Mishkan, and that was the tabernacle in Shiloh. And now let's talk about the first temple built by Solomon. The Tosefta continues with the discussion of the sins of the Jewish people over the generations. Okay, and the Tosefta continues. Due to what reason was the first temple destroyed? And the Talmud explains, it was destroyed due to the fact that there were three matters that existed in the first temple: idol worship, forbidden sexual relations, and bloodshed. And then the Talmud continues to establish how these three sins were prevalent during the time of the first temple era, or at least toward the end of the first temple era, based on various verses from the books of the prophets. And we're not going to go through all of them, but you should know that these are the three cardinal sins, if you will, of Judaism: idolatry, adultery, and murder. These are the three cardinal sins upon which halacha says, Jewish law says, yahareg v'al yavar, that a person should give up their life and not transgress. Let me explain. When it comes to any other mitzvah in Torah, if someone is told, violate the mitzvah, violate the commandment, or else I will take your life, the person is instructed by Torah to violate the mitzvah. Right? Because life overrides all other Torah obligations, except for these three. So if somebody says, worship idols, or else, you don't worship idols. If someone says, commit adultery, or else, you don't commit that violation. And if someone says, murder someone else, or else, sins in Judaism, or the three, mitzvahs, speaking in a positive way, the three mitzvahs in Judaism that are absolute and non-negotiable. These are not up for negotiation. Well, my life was in danger, I had to. It's not. These are non-negotiable mitzvot. These are absolutes. These happen to be the three areas in which the Jewish people were lax toward the end of the first temple era, and the Talmud says this is why it was destroyed. And again, I need to explain. The Talmud is not pointing fingers. The Talmud is part of it. In other words, saying that this is, we as a community, we were struggling with this, and this is what happened. But I also need to tell you that all of this is based on another truth, and that is that there was never a consideration that the temple was destroyed because the ancient Babylonians were very mighty. That was never a question. I hope what I'm saying makes sense. It was never a consideration that the reason why the first temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of the Babylonians, the reason why it was destroyed is simply because the Babylonians were very powerful and mighty, and they came in and destroyed the temple. That's not it. When you believe that God runs the world, then you also believe that there's something else at play. And so the Talmud says, what is going on? What is happening here? Why did the first temple end up in ruins? Why were the Jewish people exiled? Why was so much life lost when the temple was destroyed and Jerusalem ransacked? Why did this happen? It happened because we weren't where we needed to be on a moral and spiritual level. There was idolatry, forbidden sexual relations, and bloodshed. This is what was going on, and that is what the result was. So that's regarding the first temple. Let's fast forward a little bit, and let's go to the discussion about the second temple. Hold on. Okay, here we go. However, the Talmud says, however, considering that the people during the second temple period were engaged in Torah study, observance of mitzvot, and acts of kindness, and that they did not perform the sinful acts that were performed in the first temple, so then why was the second temple destroyed? The Talmud asks, the first temple was destroyed because of the big three: idolatry, adultery, and murder. But the second temple era, you didn't have that. Yeah, we mentioned before there was some corruption with the high priesthood, and that position was being sold and bought. Okay, whatever. But you didn't have such fierce, such horrific violations of the big three, mitzvot. So why was that temple destroyed? And here is the Talmudic answer. This was the last thing we mentioned at the end of last week's Kabbalah Coffee class, and I wanted to pick it up today with this conversation because it's really important. The Talmud answers, it was destroyed due to the fact that there was wanton hatred during that period. By the way, wanton is not wonton. That's a soup, and that's not what we're talking about here. Wanton, what's a good translation of that word? Who can give me a good translation of that word? Unmute yourself. No?
Reckless destruction.
Reckless hatred. Good. What else? Wanton.
Just acting without regard for rule.
Good.
Or ethics.
Good. Excellent. This is this translation of the word sinat chinam. I don't know if I can highlight it without something else popping up. But can you see my little hand, on the screen, going back and forth? Yes. Yeah. Okay. So I'm moving it back and forth over the Hebrew words sinat chinam. Sinat chinam. It's translated here as wanton hatred. Chinam means free, and free can mean like open and prevalent and just everywhere. There's hatred everywhere.
Unprovoked hatred.
Sorry?
Unprovoked hatred?
Unprovoked hatred, yes. Sinat chinam here also means unprovoked, unwarranted, and baseless. So all of those things apply. Wanton, baseless, unprovoked, exactly. So what the Talmud is saying is that the first temple was destroyed because of the big three: idolatry, adultery, and murder. Those are very terrible sins. The second temple was destroyed for something that seems not so bad, or seems to be not as horrific: wanton hatred. But what does the Talmud say? What's the conclusion? This comes to teach you that the sin of wanton hatred is equivalent to the three severe transgressions of idol worship, forbidden sexual relations, and bloodshed. So the Talmud's conclusion is, if one temple is destroyed because of these three, and the second, wanton hatred means between people in the community, between Jews. The Talmud says, if that destroyed the second temple, that means that wanton hatred, sinat chinam, not getting along with each other, is equivalent to the three severe transgressions: idolatry, adultery, and murder. That's a big deal. But our discourse takes it a step further. Our discourse that we're studying, and this is the last point we mentioned last week, takes it a massive step further and says, the first temple stood in ruins for only 70 years. The first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians. It was rebuilt 70 years later. It was only in a destructive mode, or in destruction, in ruins, for 70 years. That was the extent of the exile, of the first exile. And what about now? 1950 years. 1,950 years since the year 70 of the Common Era, which according to many historians either 69 or 70 was the year the temple was destroyed. So we're talking about 1,950 years. Because of what sin? Baseless hatred. Which means the following. Which means that the adultery and murder, they were able to clean up between the first and second temples. In those 70 years, they cleaned up their act. In the last 1,950 years, you know what it means? We still haven't found a way to really get along with each other. That's the sobering thought here. For 1,950 years, 1,950 years, we are still fighting with each other. We are still critical of each other for no reason. We're still not getting along. We're still looking to tear down the other person. We're still jealous of each other. That, the Rebbe said many times, with tears, that when you think about the temple, and you wish to have the temple back with Mashiach, with a better world, all you need to do is look at the cause and reverse the cause. What caused the second temple to be destroyed? Baseless hatred. What's going to reverse it? What's going to bring it back? What's going to bring Mashiach? What's going to make this world a better place once and for all? It's the opposite of that, which is baseless love. I know in the 60s, there was a movement of free love. I think it's a little bit different. Baseless love and free love may be not exactly the same. What this means is love the other even though you have good reason not to. Love the other. Truly care about the other person even though you may not have a reason to do so. Love them anyway. Love them despite the fact that they see the world differently, they have different opinions, different ideologies, they dress different, they look different, they sound different. Doesn't matter. Love them anyway. A world in which we get along with each other and respect each other and love each other, not because we're all alike, but because we're all different. That's a world in which the temple is rebuilt and Mashiach is here.
Is there an Hebrew word for that, just like sinat chinam? Is there like
yeah, sure. Ahavat chinam. Ahavat chinam means free love, or wanton love, or baseless love, groundless love.
Unconditional love.
Unconditional love. Yes, that's the phrase. Unconditional love, which means not loving the person that you already love. Not being friends with the person you're already friends with. Don't not be friends with them. One second. I'm not advocating, fighting. But what I'm saying is, it means even extending the olive branch to the other who maybe you don't get along with, or maybe you think you have a reason not to get along with. It doesn't matter. Love them anyway. Unconditional love, unconditional acceptance. And everyone thinks, the first thought that comes to mind is the rejection of this. It's like, no, you don't understand. I definitely would love them if only they ... Right? Or I can't love them because ... Or I can't respect them because ... Or I can't get along with them because of ... I can't tolerate them because of ... And you know what? In your head, you're justified 100%. Of course, in my head, we're all justified in our heads. And guess what? If we don't change, 1950 years and counting. That's the way it is. The Talmud tells us clearly, the first temple was destroyed because of 3 major sins, but we were able to turn it around and we got a second temple. The second temple was destroyed because of 1 factor. It doesn't say, the corruption of the priesthood and this, that, plus baseless hatred. Nope. It's not what it says. It says 1 factor brought about the destruction of the second temple. Baseless hatred. And we're still waiting to fix it. And by the way, we're not waiting on anyone else. It's in my hands. It's in my relationships, or lack thereof, are totally in my control, as are yours. It's all up to us. This is not the Talmud pointing fingers at anybody. This is the Talmud saying, look inside. Is there a relationship? Are there relationships that we can fix? Can we be more tolerant of each other? I don't think there's a question that the answer is yes. When you remove the cause, you remove the effect. I'll say that again. When you remove the cause, you remove the effect. Remove the cause of the temple's destruction and you remove the effect, i.e. the temple being destroyed. That's what it says. That's what it says in the good books. Just to bring you in on this a little bit deeper, let's take a look at what happened when the temple was destroyed, or what led to the temple's destruction. I'm going to now pull up a different tractate of Talmud. Did your screen switch when I clicked on Gittin 55b? Yes? Do you see Gittin 55b at the top? Right there?
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
All right, here we go. Let me scroll down. Let me scroll down a little bit. It's at the bottom of 55b. Okay, let's see. Okay, here we go. All right, this is brought as a bit of a tangent in the Talmud. But a lot of Talmud the Talmud is very free-flowing. So it starts off in one place and it's like Kabbalah Coffee. You know, we go all sorts of places. The Talmud starts off in one area and one topic, and then it branches out very quickly to other areas of conversation. I'm going to read to you a monumental section of Talmud, a very famous, a very important section of Talmud that explores what led to the destruction of the second temple, the one that we're talking about. It was destroyed by the Romans in the year 69 or 70, but what really led to the temple's destruction? Now we know from the other Talmud, Yoma 9a, we know that what led to the temple's destruction is wanton hatred. But let's see the story. So again, we're merging together these two Talmudic sections. After the destruction of the second temple, the Talmud examines several aspects of the destruction of that temple in greater detail. Okay, here we go. Rabbi Yochanan said, by this translation, Rabbi Yochanan said, what is the meaning of that which is written in Proverbs? Happy is the man who fears always, but he who hardens his heart shall fall into mischief. Again, happy is the man who fears always, but he who hardens his heart shall fall into mischief. What does that mean? Jerusalem, he answers, Jerusalem was destroyed on account of Kamtza and Bar Kamtza. The place known as the King's Mountain was destroyed on account of a rooster and a hen, and the city of Beitar was destroyed on account of a shaft from a chariot, Risbak. I think today we're only going to deal with the first situation, with the first of 3 points, which is Jerusalem was destroyed on account of Kamtza and Bar Kamtza. Here we go. The Gemara explains, Jerusalem was destroyed on account of Kamtza and Bar Kamtza. So here's the story. This is as there was a certain man whose friend was named Kamtza and whose enemy was named Bar Kamtza. Again, let's understand this. There was a fellow, we don't know his name, but we know that his friend was Kamtza, his enemy was Bar Kamtza. So similar sounding, but different people. He once made a large feast and said to his servant, go bring my friend Kamtza. What happened? The servant went and mistakenly brought him his enemy, Bar Kamtza. Classic mistake, right? You ask for Kamtza, you get Bar Kamtza. You can't even trust your servants anymore. Unbelievable. Look what's going on. All right, the Talmud continues. The man who was hosting the feast came and found Bar Kamtza sitting at his feast, who was his enemy. The host said to Bar Kamtza, that man is the enemy, Baal Devava, of that man. In other words, that is, you are my enemy. What then do you want here? Why are you here? Arise and leave. Bar Kamtza said to him, Since I have already come, let me stay, and I will give you money for whatever I eat and drink. Just do not embarrass me by sending me out. In other words, he said, look, I thought maybe you were extending the olive branch and you wanted me here. Clearly you don't want me here, but I don't embarrass me by throwing me out of your party in front of everybody. Let me stay. The host said to him, no, you must leave. Bar Kamsa said to him, I will give you money for half the feast. For half of the feast. Just do not send me away. He said, I'll pay for half your party. The host said to him, no, you must leave. Bar Kamsa then said to him, I will give you money for the entire feast. Just let me stay. The host said to him, no, you must leave. Finally, the host took Bar Kamsa by his hand, stood him up, and took him out. He basically threw him out of the party. After having been cast out from the feast, Bar Kamsa said to himself, since the sages were sitting there, and did not protest the actions of the host, although they saw how he humiliated me, learned from it that they were content with what he did, I will therefore go and inform against them to the king. He went and said to the emperor, the Jews have rebelled against you. The emperor said to him, who says this is the case? Bar Kamsa said to him, go and test them, send them an offering to be brought in honor of the government, and see whether they will sacrifice it. Basically what happens is Bar Kamsa is so fuming mad over his humiliation that he was evicted from this fellow's party, and the fact that no one, not even the rabbis who were there, did anything to stop it, did anything to stop this injustice. He said, that's it, I'm taking revenge against my own community. He goes to the emperor of Rome, and he basically tells the emperor of Rome, the Jewish people have rebelled against you, and to prove it, go try to send them an offering to offer in their holy temple. They're not going to bring it. And the Talmud continues that what happened was, we could probably read it inside, the emperor went and sent with him a choice 3-year-old calf. While Bar Kamsa was coming with the calf to the temple, he made a blemish on the calf's upper lip, and some said he made a blemish on the eyelids, a place where, according to us, i.e. Jewish law, halach, it is a blemish, but according to them, according to the Gentile rules for their offerings, it is not a blemish. Therefore, when Bar Kamsa brought the animal to the temple, the priest would not sacrifice it to be brought. That animal is unfit to be brought. But for anyone else, for the Roman emperor, it seems like a very healthy animal, and there's no justification for it not to be brought. Basically, Bar Kamsa sabotaged the animal, and the Jews didn't bring it, and that caused the whole kerfuffle. When I say kerfuffle, I mean destruction of the temple. The blemish notwithstanding, the sages thought to sacrifice the animal as an offering due to the imperative to maintain peace with the government. Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkola said to them, if the priests do that, people will say that blemished animals may be sacrificed as offerings on the altar. The sages said, but if we do not sacrifice it, then we must prevent... the sages said, if we do not sacrifice it, we must prevent Bar Kamsa from reporting this to the emperor. The sages thought to kill Bar Kamsa so that he would not go and speak against them. Rabbi Zechariah said to them, if you kill him, people will say that one who makes a blemish on sacrificial animals is to be killed. As a result, they did nothing. Bar Kamsa's slander was accepted by the authorities, and consequently the war between the Jews and the Romans began. This is the story, the Talmud says, in Gittin 55b and 56a. This is what led directly to the destruction of the Second Temple. What led to the Beis HaMikdash, the Second Temple's destruction, was a fight between a fellow and his enemy Bar Kamsa, and the fact that he did not let him stay at the feast, and the fact that no one stood up and said, let him stay. That's what led to the temple's destruction. Because then he got revenge, and he provoked the emperor against the Jewish people, and the rest, unfortunately, is tragic history that we are still living 1950 years later. The Talmud says clearly, this was our problem. It was our mistake. No one stood up for Bar Kamsa. Of course, we're not justifying Bar Kamsa's actions. Yeah, he was a snitch to the government, or he made up a story. The Jews were not rebelling against the emperor. They just didn't bring the offering because it was blemished. I get it. He lied, and he set it up, and he destroyed his own people, and etc. Fine. But the Talmud doesn't blame Bar Kamsa. The Talmud does not blame Bar Kamsa. The Talmud doesn't say that the Second Temple was destroyed. Well, it does say because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. But as you saw in Tractate Yoma, the Talmud doesn't say the First Temple was destroyed because of 3 sins. The second temple was destroyed because of some dude named Bar Kamsa. That's not what it says. It says it was destroyed because of sinat chinam, because of baseless hatred. Because the Talmud knows, the Talmud knew, and we know, that the issue, Bar Kamsa obviously should not have done what he did. But if it wasn't him, it would have been something else. And if it wasn't that thing, it would have been another scenario. A community in which, a civilization in which, people are fighting against each other is a rotten, I don't mean that in a judgmental way, I just mean it's a not strong society, it's a not strong civilization, it's a weak society, it's hollowed out from the inside. A society in which people are fighting against each other, people are not getting along with each other, people spare no opportunity to go out and slug the other, right? Throw punches at the other. A society that is principled, that is dedicated, that is founded upon, is not a society. It's not a sustainable society. It's not a. You don't have. If there's no unity, then you don't have anything. What do you have? You have buildings. The temple was destroyed because the Jews could not get along with each other. There were more things that led to it. More infighting that led to it. The Talmud continues to explain. See if we can find it. When the Romans lay siege to Jerusalem, they essentially surrounded the city, and no one could get in and out, which, as you know, can be a problem. If you can't get any supplies into a city, and no one can get out, then you've got a problem. The Talmud says that there were 3 wealthy people in Jerusalem, and they had so much wealth that they could sustain the city for a long time. The Talmud continues, these 3 wealthy people offered their assistance. One of them said, and the Talmud states their name above, but it's not relevant right now. One of them said to the leaders of the city, I will feed the residents of the city of Jerusalem with wheat and barley. And one of them said to the leaders of the city, I will provide the residents with wine, salt, and oil. And one of them said to the leaders of the city, I will supply the residents with wood. So one offered wheat and barley, one offered wine, salt, and oil, one was offering wood. The Gemara comments, the sages gave special praise to he who gave wood, since this was an especially expensive gift. As Rav Chisda would give all the keys to his servant except for the key to his shed for storing wood, which he deemed the most important of them all. Okay, whatever. Wood is somehow now very important. As Rav Chisda said, okay, let's continue. Here we go. You ready? It gets worse. It gets worse. There were certain zealots among the people of Jerusalem. The sages said to them, let us go out and make peace with the Romans. But the zealots did not allow them to do this. The zealots said to the sages, let us go out and engage in battle against the Romans. But the sages said to them, you will not be successful. It would be better for you to wait until the siege is broken in order to force the residents of the city to engage in battle. The zealots arose and burned down these storehouses of wheat and barley, and there was a general famine. You see what's going on here? There were provisions in Jerusalem to ride out the siege, and then to eventually strike a deal with the Romans and make peace. But what happens? Again, there's infighting. I hope you're getting the dysfunction that's going on, that the Talmud is describing. You have the leaders of the community that are saying, let's take a level-headed approach, let's wait this out, and let's strike a deal with the Romans. And then you have the zealots who say, no, we're going to fight the Romans. And in order to force everybody into that mode of desperation of needing to fight, they burn down all the supplies. It's very painful. I'm very, every time I read this and every time I teach this, I'm very bothered by this. Not just bothered by what happened then, but bothered by primarily by just reflections in the world that we live in today. A world in which many people would burn down their own storehouses. A world in which people would kick people out of their parties. A world in which we can't get along, but we justify from today to tomorrow. And the Talmud says, you can justify it, but you know what? You're not going to have a temple, and you're not going to have a Jerusalem, and this is what you have. You have what you have. You want a broken world? Then have a broken world. You want a fixed world? You want a world that's kind, that's generous, that's loving? Then create that. It's a simple mandate. It's not easy, but it's a very straightforward mandate. Simple, i.e. straightforward. The straightforward message is, get along with the other guy. It wasn't only Kamsa bar Kamsa. Somebody texted me in the chat box, is it Kamsa and bar Kamsa, or is this a reflection of what was going on in general? The answer is a reflection of what's going on in general. This is another story. The Zealots are so filled with their own zealotry that they can't get along. They can't, toe the line and go with everyone else and kind of ride it out and take a level-headed approach. They go and burn down their own supplies. They're literally their own food supplies. Shocking. Self-sabotage. The Talmud gets even more. It gets more and more painful as the story goes on. But I think we've had enough for today with this. And again, it's not an ancient problem. I quoted the Talmud very specifically before, a different piece of Talmud that says, if someone is living and in their lifetime the temple is not built, it means it's being destroyed once again. If the Talmud is not being rebuilt right now, it means right now it's burning. And we know why it's burning right now. The temple is burning. If the temple is not being built, the temple is burning. And why is the temple burning? The Talmud told us why. Because we're not getting along with each other. Sinat chinam. Baseless hatred. Unjustified hatred. Of course the person that hates justifies it. So everyone says, I don't have unjustified hatred. My hatred is very justified. Okay. So that's where we're at. You think the host that kicked out Bar Kamsa didn't have a good reason for not liking Bar Kamsa? To him it was a great reason. For us, it's a disaster. But for him it was a justified reason. So again, you and I, listen, we can have excuses and rationales and justifications from today to tomorrow. But is this, simple question, is this the world we want to live in? Do we want to live in a world in which no one gets along? In which there are echo chambers. Everyone gets along in their own echo chamber, but they can't look at the other person in the eye. They can't have a conversation. They can't reach across the table. We live in a very polarized world. And the question is, who is doing the polarization? And the question is, are we polarizing? Again, there's no point to blame someone else. Are we polarizing in our own lives? It's a simple question that requires a simple response. Not easy, but simple. It's very straightforward. Straightforward thing is, open your heart to the other person. Open a dialogue with the other person. You can disagree on an issue and not be disagreeable. Right? Famously, as many countless stories have been told, the Lubavitcher Rebbe would disagree. When he disagreed with somebody, he never made it personal. That's it. The Rebbe never spoke about people. The Rebbe spoke about ideas. You have an idea, you have a disagreement about an idea, fine. It's an ideological disagreement. Okay. So what's clear here is, from the Talmud and from, this morning we've been focusing on the Talmud, but from really all Jewish sources, what's very clear is that sinat chinam, not getting along with others, is is where this begins and ends. It's where this begins and ends. And yeah, there are other issues to fix, certainly. But as our discourse says, they pale in comparison to the damage that is created by baseless hatred, by sinat chinam. It pales in comparison. Even murder, even idolatry, even adultery only led to an exile of 70 years, 70 years. This is 1950 years. We still can't get our act together. It's a sobering thought. It's not meant to depress us, it's meant to encourage us to step up our game. I'm getting a few questions here in the chat. I'm going to read them. Are these the ones who fought at Masada? No. No, this is not the ones who fought at Masada. This is just talking about Jerusalem itself. And is this only for Jew versus Jew? No, this is for everybody. This is getting along. I mean, look, if you're talking to a Jewish community, then it begins within the community. But really, this is getting along with everyone. Oh, Julie's asking, the Zealots were the ones who fought at Masada. We once had a class explaining what happened at Masada. But yeah, there were Zealots who fought at Masada also. Probably different ones, but cut from the same cloth. All right. Good. Let's jump into our text. Our text cites this Talmudic passage, or these Talmudic passages, in the context of understanding the imperative to get along with each other. Again, I'm just continuously shocked by how simple this is, and yet how not easy this is. Okay, what screen do you guys see? Do you guys see the Talmudic screen, or do you see something else?
You're in 56A.
It's the Talmud. Okay, let me stop share, and I'm going to share a different screen. Okay, all right, here we go. So let me check in with all y'all. Let's take a minute or two for questions, comments, ideas, additions. You can take a quick break, grab something to eat or drink. All right, please unmute yourself to make a comment or to ask a question.
So what's your advice, Rabbi, in terms of getting along with others who have, let's bring it to today.
Without getting political, though. We have to do this without getting political.
Not political.
Okay.
Taking a walk outside with my asthmatic daughter, and folks not wearing masks or practicing social distancing, and me getting very anxious and frustrated by folks who are not following basic science.
Right.
And so what to do with, those feelings and reactions, especially with folks who are not listening to scientific evidence.
So you gotta love them. You gotta love them. You gotta love them.
They put my daughter in
Right.
danger, who's vulnerable.
Right. Okay. I hear you. I think there's still a place. There's still a way to, understand. Maybe they don't realize, maybe they're oblivious to the danger for whatever reason, because either they're not at risk or because whatever it is, maybe they're not paying attention. So we can afford them. We can give them the benefit of the doubt. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't take precautions and do whatever we can to try to educate the other person or try to, whatever it is. But we can do so from a place of kindness and better understanding, as opposed to a place of, harsher judgment. I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying it's possible. It's possible. Yeah.
Not to speak with authority, of course. I am in a high risk group, and so are many of my friends, and this comes up quite a bit. And I feel dislike the action, love the person.
Right.
What are you loving exactly? If I could put you on that. I mean, I'm pushing you because I'm struggling with this. Like I think like all human beings are struggling with these kinds of things.
I understand. I understand. And I've been struggling with this for years, actually, being chronically ill. And what I love is person soul, mostly their humanness.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just to
Things
weigh
that
in, I
things are Hashem or God.
yeah, I think that when you say about don't may not necessarily love the actions, but the person, it means seeing the other person as a divine creature, just like us, a person that has a soul, a person that has an neshama, a person that has a divine life force, a person that's being recreated at this moment. Sometimes it takes a little bit more meditation to get to that place, but at the end of the day, that's what we all are. And I think that the more we train ourselves to see the inner beauty, the more the inner beauty comes out, and we're happier, and they also respond. When I say they, people respond when you look at them in the best way. That's if you see any videos or any you there are so many examples where in the Lubavitcher Rebbe's dealings where he completely you know looked at the beauty, the inner beauty of the person, and that absolutely changed everything. That brought out a completely different dimension within that person, and it's not easy. It's not. It's not.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
so I'll share with you what I do as the ideal, but I will also, sort of along with Julie, say that I've been finding that my strategy is doesn't work as well lately because there's so many challenges to it. But sometimes when it gets really bad, I imagine the person as an infant, to say that they started out as kind of a pure and young and so on, and that what they're doing now has a lot to do with being influenced by an environment that is, and in many ways, not something that they went looking for in that way. That said, though, I think that the reality is that it's harder and harder these days to do that because it's just one thing coming at us. And, when you feel personally assaulted, or, for me, it's when taking a walk and a runner is coming towards me, and I'm the one who has to go into the middle of the road, and a young, 18-year-old runner would have run right into me or right next to me or pushed me aside as one did before. It becomes harder and harder to do that. So I think just in thinking about this, always in trying to get to that place of love, at the same time being acknowledging that we're in a very challenging, very, very challenging time right now to be able to do that.
Yeah. It's challenging, but because it's challenging, I think it's even more important now. And yeah, we're not going to be 100% successful in our efforts to, extend, the best possible, what's the language I'm looking for, to, the benefit of the doubt to everybody. But that should be our goal. Our goal should be to have more love for the other and less of the judgment. And I think that by nature, some people are we talk about chesed and gvura. So some people are naturally more extending benefit of the doubt, and some people are naturally more looking and discerning, and that's fine. Everyone has a different personality, but I judge negatively, and the ability to extend the benefit of the doubt, and that's, I think, more than ever, that is the challenge, our challenge, and that's really our shlichut, our mission in life. Marnin.
Thanks. I was coming back with what the people were saying is that I've heard this many years ago, and it says people just don't act right, and the harder I try to make them act right, the worse I get.
Right.
And that, and it's an opportunity rather than to go to judgment how callous they are, especially people that or like in your path. Well, steps, discretion being the better part of valor, and to take the high road because there's an opportunity for us to grow if we can. I mean, there are a lot of times, especially in this political climate, where there are a lot of people that I don't agree with, and some of my best friends are that way. But I've ceased trying to. If that topic comes up, I just go away because it's not going to do any good. I'm not going to change their minds, and so some people are just oblivious. And it's just like if they were small children, and you would not get angry at them.
Yeah, and I think there's still sorry.
And sometimes, it's all a matter of growing up. There's growing up is an antidote to getting old. Right. That if you can take situations where, personally myself, just this whole situation where when I was just oblivious to some of this, I wouldn't wear the mask sometimes, wear the gloves sometimes. And now, even when I'm walking by myself out with the dogs, I do it because I'm realizing that there are other people that are more sensitive, and maybe it wouldn't hurt me to be a little more cautious as well.
Right. Yeah, and I think the bottom line is that people respond better in general when things are coming from a place of love and care, and not from such a judgy place. And again, our challenge, the great challenge of our times, is being able to get along with the other one. That's it. So if it was easy, it wouldn't be a challenge. It's the great challenge, and that's where we are. Okay, what I'm going to do now is share my screen once again, and now we're going to study. We're going to get back to our discourse text. Okay, I'm going to make the screen a little bit bigger, and let us pick it up from the second paragraph on page 34. Okay, let me go ahead and make sure that everybody is muted once again. Here we go. Okay. Page 34. Second paragraph. It is therefore much more difficult to correct the klipa, the evil of midyan. Midyan is strife and disunity, not getting along with each other. It is therefore much more difficult to correct this klipa. This is exactly what we're talking about. This is the hardest challenge. The hardest challenge is to correct the klipa of midyan. It's harder to do that, much more difficult to correct that klipa than the klipa of the other 7 negative character traits, even though they involve actual transgressions of the Torah's commandments. The first exile, which resulted from the transgression of severe sins, idolatry, adultery, and murder, lasted only 70 years. During those 70 years, the blemishes caused by those sins were corrected. The present exile, as is known, was caused by the sin of baseless hatred. As the Talmud states, the second sanctuary was destroyed because of baseless hatred. We just studied that inside. And this bitter exile has lasted over 1,800 years. Well, you could see that we're some years after this was written, because now it's 1950 years. This bitter exile has lasted over 1,800 years, for the blemish which caused it was all pervasive. This is much more pervasive, and it's much more difficult to correct, and it's much more severe. Hence, the verse uses the expression. Now let's get back to our text. This is quoting now from the book of Numbers. Toward the end of the book of Numbers, the book of Bamidbar, God tells Moses to wage war against Midyan, but specifically God says, I want you to wage war. Why? To extract, I'll highlight it here with my cursor, with my mouse, to extract the retribution of God, Havaya, from Midyan. That was the rationale for the war against Midyan that was told to Moses. God tells Moses, go to war against Midyan. Why? I want you to exact the retribution of God from Midyan. So now we explain this from a Kabbalistic and psycho-spiritual level. Starting again from the beginning of this paragraph. Hence, the verse uses the expression to exact the retribution of God, Havaya, from Midyan. Since Midyan is the antithesis and opponent of the name Havaya, God, the war against them was termed the retribution or vengeance of God. In other words, when you fight against Midyan, you're fighting against the enemy of God. What is Midyan? Midyan is the arch enemy of Havaya. Whoops, I highlighted too much. Of Havaya. Why? Because we said that God's name Havaya represents unity and togetherness and harmony. And Midyan represents strife and infighting and baseless hatred. So when God says to Moses, collect an army and go to war against Midyan, and by doing so you're going to exact the retribution, you're going to take the retribution, take revenge, or exact retribution of God, of Havaya, means because Havaya is directly and diametrically opposed by Midyan. Midyan is strife, Havaya is unity. Let's continue. Make sense? Yes? By nod of the head? Yes? Okay. Let's continue. For the same reason, this war had to be conducted by Moshe, by Moses. This was one of the first, for those that were with us in the first session, the first few sessions, this was a question that we asked. Why did God say that Moses needed to fight this war? There were many wars that Joshua fought after Moses' passing. Why did this war have to be fought by Moses specifically? And why does God say once you fight this war, then you will be gathered unto your people? In other words, then you're going to pass away. Why is this like the culmination? Why is this like the top of the mountain for Moses, this war against Midian? And why did Moses have to be involved? So he explains. This war, for the same reason, had to be conducted by Moses. Why? Because Moses was the personification of absolute bittul and unity, as will be explained below. Who is Moses? The Talmud tells, the Torah tells us. The Torah says, "Va'ish Moshe," this man Moses is anav mikol adam apnei adam, was the most humble person from all people on the planet. In other words, Moses is symbolic. Moses is defined, or Moses' quality, primary quality, is humility. Humility. And what is humility? Humility is the key to getting along, is the key to unity. So when you have bittul, which is right, that Hebrew word, bittul, when you have that egoless, humble nature, then you can have the next word, which is unity. And that was Moses. So God says you have to fight against Midian, because Midian is opposing Havaya. Midian opposes God's name. God's name is unity, and Midian is strife. So we have to get rid of the strife and bring back the unity. And who leads the charge? Not Joshua, but Moses. Because who is Moses? Moses is the archetype. Moses is the symbol. He's the emblem of humility. Moses never exemplified any pride or arrogance. Famously at the burning bush, when God says to Moses, I want you to be the leader of the Jewish people and take the Jewish people out of Egypt, what does Moses say? For a whole week? Nah, not me. Find someone else. You got the wrong guy. What about Aaron? Moses demurs. For 7 days he says no. Until God basically tells him, you have no choice. And then Moses says, okay. Moses never lost his humility. Moses never lost his humility. There's an unbelievable story told about Moses. And the kindness that Moses had. You see, again, when you have the bittul, when you have that humility, then you can see the best in the other person. When we're filled with ego, or when we're looking at it from our own perspective, it's hard to attribute, the best to the other. But when we approach it from a place of humility, we're more likely to extend that to the other. The story is told, how did Moses end up at the burning bush anyway? Moses was living in Midian, actually, ironically enough. He was living in Midian. What happened? Moses grew up in the palace, right? He was a Jewish boy, put on the Nile River, rescued by Pharaoh's daughter, grew up in the palace. When he got older, he saw a Jew being beat up. He knew he was Jewish. He saw a Jew being beat up by an Egyptian, killed the Egyptian. At that point, he became the most wanted man in Egypt. So he ran away from Egypt to run away for his life. And he ends up in Midian, this nation that we're talking about right now, but years earlier. He ends up in Midian, and he meets a girl. Her name is Tzipora. They fall in love. They get married. He works for her father, Jethro, and he becomes a shepherd. And the Midrash tells us what happened. One day, he was shepherding his flock, and one sheep runs away. One little sheep, a baby sheep, a little sheep runs away from the rest of the flock. Moses runs after the little sheep. He runs after, chases him, keeps on running. They're both running. Finally, the sheep runs all the way to a brook, to a place of water, and starts drinking. Moses says, I didn't know you were thirsty. He bends down, and after the sheep finishes drinking, he bends down and picks up the little sheep. And he carries the sheep with love back to the rest of the flock. It was on that return journey, carrying the little sheep, that God appears to Moses at the burning bush. And 9 out of 10 times, I'm going to say 10 out of 10 times, this story is understood as highlighting how Moses cared about every individual. Right? Moses cares about every little sheep. Right? Even one sheep, one wayward sheep that goes off from the rest, Moses tracks down with love to rescue. So God says, if you run after every sheep like that, I want you to be the leader of my people. There's another element to the story as well. That is, when Moses sees that the sheep is drinking the water, Moses says, you were thirsty. So often we see people doing things and we attribute the worst possible scenario to them. Moses didn't reprimand the sheep and say, I had to chase you down. Look at you. What a wayward sheep you are. I had to run, leave everyone else behind just to chase after you. You good for nothing. I'm responsible for you, so I'm going to chase you down. But you should know you're a very bad sheep. Very bad shepsela. And taken back very indignant and very upset. Guess what? If that would have happened, God doesn't speak to Moses at the burning bush. What does Moses say? Moses says, you were thirsty. That's what's going on. Moses realizes that there's a very good reason why we have a wayward sheep. Yeah, a child starts doing things that a parent doesn't like. Right? Breaks away from the parent's teachings, breaks away from a teacher's teachings, breaks away from a community. You can blame the child from today to tomorrow. You're missing the point. The child is thirsty. The child is thirsty. Moses was able to see that the animal was thirsty. It's not getting what it needs with you. It needs something else. So don't blame it. Look within. If the other person is not looking the way you like them to look, then it's not time to point a finger at them or wag a finger at them. We look inside and we give them the best benefit of the doubt that we can with love. And with love, carry them when they're ready back in the fold, so to speak. This is Moses. This is humility. This is not arrogance. This creates unity. This is love and reaching out to everyone. To everyone, even those that have run astray, so to speak, and whatever level that means to you. Does that make sense what I just said? Yes? I'm looking for some head nods. Are we getting any head nods here? Yes? Okay, I'm getting some. Fine.
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. So this is Moses. This is why Moses is precisely the persona, precisely the individual, the character who needs to fight against Midian. The war against Midian is won with bittul and with unity. How do you fight strife? With love, with a love that's born of selflessness. Let's continue. It was therefore, okay, I'm up to this line that I'm highlighting. It was therefore the presence of Moshe. It's Moses' energy which gave the souls of Israel the power to fight against Midian and destroy them back in ancient times. And therefore he specifically had to appoint the soldiers to wage war. Why was it Moses' war? It's because his energy is needed to fight this war against Midian. It was an ancient war, but as we're explaining here, according to Kabbalah, it's a timeless war. The war is going on right now, and there's no one else involved. It's just you and I. Well, no, it's not even you and I. It's just me. That's how I need to look at it. There's a war. There's a Midian war. More than ever today, there's a war against Midian. Where is Midian? Inside me. Where is Moses? Inside me. I have to fight against my own urge to be judgy, to be blamey, to be pointing fingers-y. I'm sorry for doing all these E's at the end. I have to fight against my own tendency to diminish the other, demean the other, shame the other, judge the other, besmirch the other, assassinate the other's character, etc., etc., etc. And how do I do that? With my inner Moses. This is Kabbalah. This is Kabbalah and Chassidus 101. You take a story from the Torah that talks about an ancient... This is like a beautiful snapshot of what Kabbalah is about. It's about taking Torah and revealing its timeless messages, revealing its timeless themes. Torah is today. It's not some ancient history book. This is a guide for today. Right now, on April 26th, 2020, I am meant, you also, but you have to say that. I can't say that about you. I have to fight a war against Midian. I have to fight against anytime I feel the tickling, anytime I feel the urge to judge and to divide and to fight and to get angry, I have to fight that with love. I have to fight that with Moses. I have to fight that with unity. And that comes from the bittul, the humility. So again, that's why Moses is the one leading the charge. And that's why Moses is the one who gathers the soldiers. Let's continue inside. Similarly, the term Heicholzu me'itchem. That's what the Torah says. Heicholzu me'itchem. Arm from yourself. Soldiers. Heicholzu was used because this discourse in Hebrew is known as Heicholzu. If you want to sound profesh in the know, and people ask, what are you studying Sunday mornings? Heicholzu. That's what this is known as. Heicholzu. Okay, so now you know. Similarly, the term Heicholzu was used because this form of the verb emphasizes that all of the Jewish people joined in the effort, and that they were characterized by unity. In the beginning, in the first few chapters of this discourse, he asked, why does it say Heicholzu and not Yecholzu? Grammatically in Hebrew, it would have made more sense to use the term Yecholzu and not Heicholzu. So why Heicholzu? Heicholzu makes it sound like all the Jews are fighting this war, whereas Yecholzu means only some, and the truth is only some fought. Not everyone was a soldier. There were only some soldiers chosen from the entire nation. So it should have said Yecholzu. So he explains here, according to Kabbalah, no, that's the point. Heicholzu, everyone fights this battle. Everyone needs to fight against Midian, and everyone needs to be together in this fight, because that's the whole nature of this fight. It's all about unity. So if you make fragmentation in the fight for unity, guess what? You're still fragmented. I hope what I just said makes sense. If in the pursuit of unity we further fragment, then guess what? There's no unity. That's why the Hebrew word used was Heicholzu, that everyone's doing this together, because we all need to fight together against division. I'm going to read it again. Similarly, the term Heicholzu was used because this form of the verb emphasizes that all of the Jewish people joined in the effort, and that they were characterized by unity, the very opposite of divisiveness and fragmentation. Let's continue to the next page. Hence, they could fight against Midian and exact the retribution of God from Midian. In other words, a Jewish people united could fight against Midian and, quote, exact the retribution of God, Havaya, from Midian. In other words, heal the problem, which the problem was, break the antithesis being Havaya is unity, Midian is disunity. It's the Jewish unity that was able to fight against the disunity, divisiveness of Midian. So in short, what chapter was that? That was XVII. So that was chapter 17. So in short, does it make sense? Hold on. I'm sure it does. I'm just double checking here. Yes. So in short, chapter 17 taught us the following. It taught us the critical importance of love, of baseless, unjustified, pure, unprovoked love, and the dangers, the horrific fallout from the opposite. We started today's class specifically with two Talmudic pieces. One that explains that the first temple was destroyed because of the three cardinal sins, and the second temple was destroyed because of baseless hatred. The second Talmudic passage gave us the story, kind of the background story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, which is a story of baseless hatred that led to the destruction, directly to the siege, to the Roman emperor getting upset and laying siege, and then ultimately to the destruction of the temple, which again happened because of more infighting. There was infighting at all stops along the way, so to speak. And we talked about how that exile, it's not just what the Talmud says in Tractate Yoma, that we see how baseless hatred is just as bad as the three cardinal sins. Our discourse says it's worse, because the three cardinal sins only led to a 70-year exile. And the 70-year exile was key idea here is that all hatred is ultimately justified. But according to this, it's all ultimately baseless, because if we truly had that space of humility and love, we would be able to reach out to the other on some level and bridge the gap on some level and create some sort of love for the other. And then, of course, at the end of chapter 17, he ties it back into the verses that we started the discourse with and explains why it is such a battle. Why is it God's battle? Well, because Havaya, God's name, is symbolized by unity. So this is literally God's battle. And why is it the battle that Moses needs to fight? Well, because Moses represents bittul and unity, so he's the perfect person to lead the charge. And why is it Midian? Well, Midian is divisiveness. And why all the people, if only some soldiers were involved? Well, because we're talking about unity, and so you have to have everybody on board for this unity. And with this, we close out the first 17 chapters of this text. Next week, we're going to start chapter 18. And chapter 18, we now go even deeper. Now we're going to take a deep dive into the name Havaya and understand why Havaya, the name Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei, the four-letter name of God, the holiest name of God, the name of God that we don't pronounce the way it's written. When we read it in Torah, we don't pronounce it the way it's written. It's so sublime that we can't even utter the words or utter those letters. And I'm saying the Hebrew letters as Yud Kei Vav Kei. There's no K in Hebrew. K, I'm saying instead of the letter Hey. It's so sublime we don't even say the letters in proximity to each other. Yud, and then Hey, and then Vav, and then Hey. But we don't say them back to back because it's so holy. We're going to explore what is Havaya, really. And what is Elokim, another name of God, and what is unity, and what is diversity, and what is holiness, and what is the opposite of holiness. We're going to take a deep Kabbalistic dive into all these themes from chapter 18 and on. This discourse numbers in total 36 chapters, so we're just about halfway through, or halfway into it, so now the fun really begins. So if you've liked what you've seen up until now, you're going to love from chapter 18 and beyond. I want to do one more thing before we close out, and that is, once again, share my screen for something very important that is happening this evening. Okay, we are starting this evening a series called the Jewish Fireside Chat Series. And every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we are going to be hosting a top thinker, a top lecture from the Jewish world to share whatever is on their heart and mind, whatever inspiration, whatever insight they're thinking about and feeling in these times, to share with our community. So we have already the first several of these lined up. This week we have Rabbi Shays Taub. He is an exceptional scholar, brilliant scholar. He's a lecturer, he's an orator, he is an author, he's a well-published author. He wrote a book on Judaism and recovery called God of Our Understanding. He is incredible. You will absolutely love him. He will be on live tonight, 7 p.m. The link is on our website, intownjewishacademy.org. Just look for the Jewish Fireside Chat series on the homepage. Click on it and it will have the link. It's absolutely free of charge, open to the entire community, and of course beyond. So it's it's being hosted here by InTown Jewish Academy by us, but it's open, of course, to everybody, no matter where they are, who they are. It's open to everybody. This is going to be profound. Next week we have, I believe, Shimona Tsakarnik. She is an amazing Kabbalist and Kabbalah coach. So she'll be speaking next week at 7 p.m. Anyway, set your calendars, block off the time. Each speaker is going to speak between probably 30 minutes to 45 minutes, somewhere in that range. So it's kind of like within that range of 30 to 45 minutes, a topic that is inspiring to them and will be inspiring to us. Look for the link online and please share it with your family and friends wherever they are. I hope to see you at the fireside for the chat, and I wish you a wonderful Sunday. And wherever you are, I hope that you are healthy and positive, and as is today's point, I hope you are in a state of love and